Step into a world of romance and mystery with Tamora Rose. Today we're reading part 1 of chapter 10 of Child of the Wind. Kanae spent the rest of the day in her room, allowing her injured ankle to heal. Though several people knocked on her door, including both the Duke and the Duchess, she ignored everyone. The next day she did the same. By day 3, she was heartily tired of sugared almonds and water and could no longer pretend her ankle was the reason she had yet to emerge from her bedchamber. It was well and truly healed. Healed enough that she could ignore it in favor of attending to her pressing hunger. After much debate, she decided that something more substantial than her almonds was in order. But she still didn't want to leave her bedchamber. She'd only barely opened the door long enough to let the lambs and Bentley free. She wasn't opening it again. With a sigh, she rose and wandered to her balcony. She didn't go out, but she did stare through the glass windows. Apple trees grew in the orchard beneath her third-floor balcony, increasing her hunger. An apple would be perfect, but the trees didn't grow high enough for her to pick one. She'd have to either leave her chamber or continue eating the sugared almonds until they were completely gone. It wasn't much of a choice. She really was hungry. Maybe she could climb down from her balcony. The moment the thought crossed her mind, Kanae dismissed it. If she fell, she could break her neck, and Jet wasn't worth killing herself over. Riding was her skill of choice. Climbing was best left to the squirrels. Her stomach growled, letting her know that Duncan and the others would just be sitting down to the noon meal. She could join them, she supposed, but she really didn't want to. Jet would likely be there, and she didn't want to see him. She didn't want to see anyone. And yet she had to eat. There were 2 great kitchens in the manor, one of them to serve the Duke and his family, the other to serve everyone else. If she could make her way to the second kitchen and request just the simplest of fare, she might be able to get back to her bedchamber without anyone being the wiser. Decision made, Kanae jumped off the bed and went in search of a clean shift. Then she donned a simple blue gown, one that she might have worn to the stables. She wasn't trying to look her best, just be presentable enough to gather some food. Her hair was a mess and would take too long to comb, so Kanae only tied it back with a purple ribbon. Her appearance wasn't perfect, but there were only servants to see. Thus ready, she threw open her door and saw Duncan standing casually in the hall, a small basket at his feet. With a gentle grin, he picked up the basket and slipped into her bedchamber. "I thought you might finally be too hungry to stay in here." He placed the basket on the nearest table. "Apples, cheese, bread, and pork. There's also a little bottle of that wine you like." A substantial meal, and one she didn't have to go searching for. She smiled her thanks and sat at the table so she could start her feast. With a flourish, she lifted the cloth covering the food and grabbed an apple. As her teeth sank into its firm flesh, Kanae almost groaned in pleasure. Duncan leaned against the wall and watched her eat. While she wasn't starving, she was clearly hungering for something more than whatever sweet she had stashed away in her bedchamber. Since she had a healthy appetite, he couldn't imagine why she would avoid dining for so long. Whatever had driven her to hide away in this chamber must be important. Important to her anyway. He had learned long ago that the 2 were not necessarily the same. When she didn't even speak to him, he cleared his throat. "Are you going to tell me?" Kanae swallowed a bite of cheese that she had been chewing and glanced up. "Tell you what?" It took everything he had not to go over there and shake her. "Tell me why you're hiding up here instead of dining with the rest of us like a proper young lady." Her eyes flashed as she grabbed the basket and rose. Without looking at him a second time, she flopped on the bed, facing away from him. She shoved a piece of soft bread in her mouth. "Aren't you going to answer me?" Duncan asked without moving. "I don't want to talk about it," she muttered around the bread. He almost argued with her, then decided it wasn't worth the effort. "Fine, but you're coming down for supper tonight." She shook her head vehemently. His eyes narrowed as he pushed himself away from the wall. "You've been pouting for 2 days. I won't let a third pass like this. You are going to wash your face, put on a pretty gown, and grace us with your presence tonight." With that, he turned away, intending to leave her to her own thoughts. "I hate him," she mumbled before he got there. "I hate him and I won't marry him. You can't make me." The last bit was whispered so quietly that Duncan almost didn't hear her, and that was unusual for her. Her typical reaction was to either rage or cry. Both were done loudly. Candace was more than a little dramatic, so the fact that she wasn't even bothering to make the effort disturbed him. What had happened since the supper they'd all enjoyed together? Only one way to find out. Why? What made you hate him? Candace rolled onto her back so she could look at him, but she didn't sit up. Sitting up required more strength than she felt she had right now. She was tired, hungry, cranky, and had an unnatural desire to run away. She'd never run away from anything in her life. This might be a good time to start. After she tried to answer Duncan's question without giving too much away. "We're not compatible," she finally muttered. Duncan's lips quirked, but he managed not to laugh. Men and women aren't compatible anyway. It's not funny. All right, I'm sorry. Making a concentrated effort not to smile, Duncan perched on a nearby table. "Tell me what happened." She wasn't about to do that. Telling him all about their encounter on the bluff and the later encounter in her bedchamber would only force him to act. Entertaining a man, even her affianced, in her bedchamber was not at all proper, and while Duncan let her get away with much, he wouldn't let her get away with having a man in her room, even if it hadn't been her fault. And he wouldn't exactly be pleased to know she'd ridden in her nightclothes. Again. He hadn't liked it in Scotland. That wouldn't change in England. So she wasn't going to tell him. And yet the words just seemed to fall out of her mouth. Everything came out of its own volition. She even told him that she'd been riding in her nightclothes again. His eyes darkened with anger several times, but he didn't interrupt her. When she finished her story, Candace rolled over and buried her face in her arms, refusing to look at him. "I'm not marrying him," was the last thing she said. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Duncan sighed and shifted in place. "Did he hurt you?" he finally asked. Candace shook her head. "Not unless you count scaring me out of my wits as harm." "I happened to, so he did hurt you." Duncan smiled as she sat up to look at him. "He's not entirely to blame in all this. You should not have been out there in your nightclothes, especially in a strange land. You know better." She stared at her hands. "But he shouldn't have hurt you," the Scotsman continued, "and he never should have entered your chamber. Those things are all his fault, and I will strive to ensure he understands that." "He thinks I'm disobedient," Candace whispered without looking up. Duncan chuckled. "You are, but only in the best ways, sweeting." Now she did look up. "Do I still have to marry him?" "Yes." He gave her a hard look so she'd know he couldn't be manipulated in this. "The king's commands are not optional. You will marry him and you will bear his children. In fact, the marriage may have to be sooner rather than later. We were thinking September, but perhaps July would be better." "A month?" She couldn't believe he was doing this to her. "You want me to marry him in a month? I hate him." "I don't think you do, but it doesn't matter. Hating him is irrelevant. He is your intended and you will marry him." "But why in a month? Why not later?" "You are hopelessly compromised," he pointed out. "You spent time alone with him, once in your bedchamber, once when you were in a state of undress. It will be assumed that you have already been bedded." "But I haven't." Her voice got higher and sharper as she became nearly hysterical. "It doesn't matter, lass. It appears you have been." Candace tried to swallow the panic rising in her throat. "I can't do it. I can't. Duncan strode forward and grabbed her shoulders. "Stop it. You're a woman, not a little girl. You have to marry him, so reconcile yourself or be miserable for the rest of your life." Those words penetrated the panic that had nearly engulfed her. He was right. The king had commanded them to wed. They would be wed. If she wanted even the smallest bit of happiness, she had to learn to live with Jet. "I can't do it," she repeated, calmer now. "He intends to smother me, to control me, and discipline me until I'm nothing more than a husk who obeys his every command. He'll take away my friends, force me to dress and act as he wants. I'll be miserable as his wife." The Scot sat beside her on the bed, leaned forward and whispered, "And change his mind." She jerked back and stared at him. How? He hates me. Hate a woman as lovely as you? Now he laughed. Unlikely. He's clearly not indifferent to you, or he wouldn't have approached you on the bluff and he wouldn't have come to your room afterward. No, he doesn't hate you. He may not understand you, but he doesn't hate you. Same thing, she pouted. No, it's not. Putting a finger under her chin, he forced her to look at him. You are vibrant, beautiful, passionate, intelligent, and more fun than any woman I've ever met. Show him that. Set aside the childish pouting. Set aside the dramatics, and let him see the emerging young woman I've had the pleasure of knowing. Frowning, she blinked up at him. But what will do that? Her long eyelashes brushed against her cheeks before lifting to reveal her golden eyes. Duncan shook his head, wondering how she could be so naive. Was it really possible for Candace to not understand the effect she had on men? Was she really that innocent? Probably. Perhaps that was part of the attraction, but it was also doing her a disservice. She had no idea how powerful she was. Jet will be enchanted by the real you, he promised. Once he sees their insides match your outsides, he'll be more than pleased to be your husband. But she remembered the way he'd looked at her and shook his head. I don't think that will work. You're not willing to at least try? To be nice for only a few hours so he can see the spirit within? Are you really so afraid to make an effort? When put that way, she sounded like a coward. Duncan continued. Come down to supper tonight. Enchant the Duke and his family. Make them love you. We both know you can. She could, but it made her feel just a little bit like a trained pet being told to perform. Her mouth formed a pout once again. Don't pout. It makes you look like a little fish. Candace immediately stopped pouting, making him laugh. He rose and made his way to the door. Once there, he turned back to look at her. I'll have a bath sent up. Be a sweet little lass and make use of it. Then join us for supper. Her eyes got that mischievous look that both irritated and amused him. Wear an actual gown, he ordered, trying not to smile. Don't look at me like that. I know you well enough to know you'd try something outrageous just for fun. Like last Christmastide when you wore only that underdress so you could irritate my mother. Don't do anything like that tonight. Maybe another night? Candace asked, eyes dancing. Now he did laugh. I think I'll leave that between you and Jet. Before either of them could say anything more, Duncan slipped out of the room. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this chapter, stay tuned for more tales of romance. Until we meet again, may your days be filled with passion and just a touch of magic.